was the summer of 2014, and for my son's bar mitzvah present, just like many Jewish parents, we wanted him to bond with the Holy Land. Oh, it worked perhaps too well. My husband had stayed back at the hotel, and our friends, my son and I, had just stopped in a pharmacy.
Run to the bomb shelter, sweetie. Please hurry. I didn't hear the sirens at first, but the Israelis did. They're used to hearing these things. We ran to the back of the storeroom. It was a 12-foot by 24-foot windowless bomb shelter. My heart's pounding. Boom! Boom! I hear it and feel the percussion of the exploding bombs. I'm trying not to get sick. I look at my 13-year-old son and I think I'll never forgive myself if something happens to him.
That's an excerpt from a speech I gave to the Orange County Jewish Bar Association. It was the first, but not the last time we had to run to a bomb shelter. Our adventure and my transformation is also the subject of my book, Blasted from Complacency, A Journey from Terror to Transformation in Israel. There is no chapter in a parenting book on what to do when a war starts and you're on a family vacation. Think touring extraordinary and sacred sites mixed with cowering in bomb shelters. I'm still trying to get over the Jewish guilt of taking my son to war for his bar mitzvah present. The impact of being human targets helped me understand the plight of Israelis living like this, and it also made me want to work on peace. How Israel is often described on the news is not what I'd seen with my own eyes. And I felt Palestinian parents also preferred their children playing safely in their backyards. The missiles exploded just near enough to blow apart my world as I knew it, forever changing me. And you'd never recognize my life today with what it was like then. I believe I found my life's purpose. Hello, my name is Penny St., and I'm the host of Peace with Penny. You just listened to my story and how I was compelled to work on peace between Israelis and Palestinians, now for over 9 years. After writing my book, Blasted from Complacency, A Journey from Terror to Transformation in Israel, becoming a Jewish National Fund speaker, and now for almost 3 years having my peace podcast, Peace with Penny, I've completed over 75 interviews of Israeli and Palestinian peace organizations. Both Israelis and Palestinians work together on peace in these organizations, utilizing creative projects from medicine, scientists, sports, art, music, conservation, interfaith, education, and the list of options to get involved goes on and on. There have been pockets of peace between Israelis and Palestinians for years, in some locations, decades. But it's never been what the media chose to show on our television sets. So it's been our goal at Peace with Penny to provide a platform for these peace organizations. But now, after the horrific Hamas torture that occurred on October 7th, and now the war, how do we continue? As the shocking stories of what the Israelis endured become public, and seeing how Hamas continues to use their people as human shields, resulting in horrific losses, how to proceed promoting peace becomes the question to answer. Some of the peace organizations we spoke with say it's now more important than ever. Some say they must pause. So what we've been doing is trying to get their voices out there, speaking about their incredible work and emphasizing what it's like to be them during this time period. Although the atmosphere currently is concerning, the work these organizations do always puts a smile on my face, and I believe you will be impressed and find hope in their actions as well. Today we'll be talking with Voice of Salam, which means Voice of Peace, which was founded in 2015 to raise awareness of a range of global issues and advocate for the promotion, protection, and understanding of human rights, interfaith, social, and cultural issues. We first spoke with them exactly 2 years ago and wanted to update everyone on their work. They're based in Great Britain. Voice of Salam's vision is of a world where every human being is treated with equal dignity, with full respect to their human rights, regardless of their gender identity, sexuality, ethnic background, nationality, or religious affiliation. Voice of Salam's mission is to break down barriers between people from diverse faith and cultural communities and promote the protection of human rights worldwide. Voice of Salam stands against all forms of hatred, including anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim hatred, Islamophobia, racism, xenophobia, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia. Ugh, there's just too many phobias out there, unfortunately. Misogyny and discrimination against people living with disabilities. Voice of Salam is a nonpartisan, non-political organization made up of members of varied faith and cultural backgrounds. I wanted to show a clip that will give you even more of an idea about their fantastic work.
People often say interfaith, it's about learning about the other faith. Actually, I think it really helps you learn more about your own faith and how you approach it and how you identify with it. So I founded Voice of Salam in 2015. We're predominantly online. We're an organisation aimed at raising awareness of human rights issues and promoting intercultural interfaith dialogue, bringing people together and breaking down stereotypes and misconceptions. So our core areas of work are Jewish-Muslim relations, gender equality, LGBT rights and refugee rights. So our mission is to promote human rights, the understanding of human rights and interfaith relations, to break down barriers and misconceptions between different communities and to bring people together. Looking at interfaith work, we need to make sure that if we're promoting such a diversity, we're also looking at that in our own communities. You know, there has to be a diversity across the board. You speak for yourself, it's your opinion, it's your experience. You can't speak for whole religion. And that sounds like quite a simple rule, but actually it's really, really important because we can't monopolise and say there's one form of the faith. You know, there's diversity, there's various interpretations, and also it kind of highlights the need for personal experience, both allowing that and accepting that we can't speak for other people. After I converted to Islam, I experienced discrimination as a visible hijabi woman. I was wearing hijab at the time, and it just got me thinking about faith, identity, what it's like being a migrant abroad. I'd always been interested in human rights and sort of identity issues. I did a lot of my studies and a lot of human rights activism.
Today, we'll be talking with Elizabeth Arif-Fear, an award-winning activist who founded Voice of Salam, which means Voice of Peace. She is also involved with various interfaith and peace-building organizations. She has several years' previous experience volunteering on interfaith and social action projects at a UK-based synagogue.
Hi, great to see you again, Penny.
Yeah.
So just before we start, I would like to highlight that this is an interview about myself and my own personal views, and not in relation to any other organisation or individual. Voice of Salam as an organisation is non-political and non-partisan. There's more information about us on our website. We do follow the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. And if you do want more information about our projects, we're at www.voiceofsalam.com.
Liz, how would you describe Voice of Salam?
I think it's intersectional. We talk about lots of different issues. I think the main kind of theme that's really come through, I've been learning through the whole process. When I first set up Voice of Salam, it was more about, you know, commonalities of different faiths, fighting anti-Muslim hate in the era of the Trump elections. And it's really kind of helped me explore, meet different people, and really cement my journey as somebody that wants to promote peace and combating hate. I think human rights and sort of religious communities, they're often sort of seen in two different camps, but I think everything's predominantly about justice and anti-hate, and that's something that we should all be on board with, I believe, whether we come from a religious or a non-religious background. And we're there to really promote that dialogue, promote diverse perspectives against, you know, homogenizing communities, against stereotypes, and really raise critical awareness and get people's voices out there.
What are your thoughts about the massacre of Israelis on October 7th?
Disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. It scares me that there are humans that can and do that to other people. It's incredibly disturbing. Incredibly disturbing. And it worries me that some people can't call it out because but what about? Can we not address something for what it is, a massacre?
Right.
Or when people quite rightly acknowledge the humanity of Palestinians and that they need to be safe and they're worried about them, quite rightly, but they'll say, and all civilians. Say it, Israelis and Palestinians. I think some people can't bring themselves to say the word or write the word Israeli as though it somehow thinks that they think they're legitimizing every single thing that the country does, that the government does. We're all human. We're all human. And I think, yeah, on a human level, I can't even imagine. It's horrible. So I'm struggling to even think about it. It's awful. Like, how could anybody not think that's awful? But I've heard things since that all of it around it, that's sort of as though almost like Israeli suffering doesn't matter. Like the dehumanization of Israelis, basically. This sort of who's suffering more, or but if I can't say this because then it means this, and can we not call out something for what it is? And also, I think it really just highlights the issue that for some people they just can't bring themselves to understand. They don't, or they can't call out Hamas for what it is.
Yeah.
This binary again, it's one or the other, or oh, well, if I say this, it means that I'm against Palestinians. And what about the Palestinians who were suppressed by Hamas? Again, I think this whole thing has highlighted that people want these binaries. They can't think about the humanity of people, and what's wrong is wrong.
What do you think when you hear it described as mere resistance?
It angers me. It saddens me for various reasons. On a factual level, it's terrorism. On an emotional level, it's terrorism. It's disgusting. And also, so the fact that it happened and it's not being acknowledged for what it is. There are people trying to downplay it. It's like trying to politicize the human suffering of people and incredible torture, and also that Hamas is a terrorist organization listed as a terrorist organization by governments globally. That therefore poses to me not just a concern of ignorance, but ignorance and also security. Some people will not understand that it is ignorance, and some people, are they being ignorant, or actually are they just okay with terrorism? A lot of problems there. So my pause wasn't because it's upsetting to think about this stuff. We're talking about women, children, men. Yeah.
What do you hear amongst your community?
On a personal level, I think I've harbored spaces where I'll, be in spaces where we're not always going to agree, but there's certain red lines. In wonderful interfaith spaces, we've all agreed, that is an act of terrorism, and it's disgusting. It is disgusting. But there are people out there that believe that it was made up, or maybe it's not them, or that so the conspiracy, I suppose, that's a form of denial and projection of anti-Semitism. I mean, the community is very diverse. I think, and I don't want to downplay terrorism as terrorism. I think on a human level, most people would think that these things are wrong. So I would say that I don't know, because in this country, it is referred to as a terrorist group, and it's very clear. Other countries, you don't know how it's being reported. Generally, there is an idea that, fighting back is resistance, but terrorism is terrorism. I think overall, people don't, and some people clearly don't understand what Hamas is. They think the power dynamic is, they think that, well, it's like having two armies, or something along those lines, perhaps. I don't know, because for me, something that's very obviously Islamist is wrong. Something that's targeting civilians is wrong. And because I've kind of been able to kind of see it all and to be in a place where I am I feel like I don't know lots. I'm not an expert, but I feel I've at least got the basic kind of nuances of it.
But you're human, for God's sakes, And
I'm human. I feel like at this point, I find it difficult to understand, because I don't want to generalize and I don't want to apologize to people.
Right.
But for example, I'll give you an example of one person. And obviously, a person speaks for themselves. We can make sort of assumptions on sentiments towards Israel and the Muslim community, but I think it's really important that we don't sort of, play into stereotypes, but whilst also denouncing, supporting terrorism is wrong. So one person who I won't name, who is not British, that is from another continent and lives in the US, she didn't say she supported Hamas, but she justified it in the way that she She basically didn't want any empathy for Israelis that were massacred in that. It was just like they can't be victims. There's only one victim. And so it's just difficult to say because it's just awful. Said, well, they're doing it because they're being oppressed. Now, is that somebody saying it's wrong, but I'm trying to understand why they're doing it, or is it somebody that's saying it's not wrong and I understand why they're doing it? So I can't generalize. We've seen sort of Islamists on rallies calling for things that are clearly violent. And then I do think there are people that are well-meaning, and I don't know what their relationship to Hamas is in the thought process. I do feel like this is ambiguity when Hamas is a terrorist organization. It cannot be supported and it must not be supported. That's not clear globally, is it? That's not clear. You can support Palestinians without supporting Hamas. So how do you deal with that? I mean, it's clearly wrong. But then a lot of people also will say, well, Israel's a terrorist state, which is wrong. But also, even if you think there's a difference between an armed Islamist group and a legitimate government that you don't agree with, like the language there is dangerous, because that's two different, a government that you think is oppressive is very different to a terrorist. I think the language, again, using the word terrorist, using the word gender, very specific terms for very specific things being flown around. Hamas is a terrorist organization, full stop.
How do you feel about them using their civilians as human shields?
Disgusting. It's disgusting, because humans deserve better than that. Palestinians deserve better than that. That doesn't help them. They deserve to be safe. And it's using them for their own gain. It's using them for hate. And also, if you were to say that to some people, they'd think, oh, that's just lies. Because I suppose for some people, that is just as unfathomable. And because, again, they've got this binary of all right and all wrong. And it's not well known outside of Jewish and Israeli or sort of Israeli-friendly spaces. It would be deemed to be propaganda.
And the tunnels? Do they believe
Again,
that they built tunnels?
It depends on the person, but it's not known. Or you'd hear it and a lot of people might think, well, that's just made up lies. It's always met with, well, that's probably just lies to demonize people.
Okay.
It's very difficult to define fact in a context where people don't want to hear things because they think it's either one side has to be very good and one side's very bad. Which is, again, the thing about the massacre. Can you not just denounce a massacre and not bring it back to something else? I mean, obviously it is within the context of the conflict, but can you not just mourn for Israelis and recognise their humanity without going, but what about? It's part of the whole problem, isn't it?
Do you think, as Israel has always stated, that they're going after the tunnels so that the missiles will stop and the terrorists coming to Israel will stop? Do you believe that, or do you think Israel is intentionally trying to hurt Gazans that Israelis believe they know are asked to stay and become martyrs and so on?
I personally believe that the IDF does not want to intentionally kill Palestinian civilians. Now, war is horrible, and I don't want civilians on either side to be hurt. What happens within that, I don't know the reality. I'm not there. There's a lot of bias reporting either way, and I would just, my thoughts and prayers would be with innocent people either side hurt, and hurt, mourning, etc. It's terrible, but I don't believe they intentionally do it. Do they take enough care? I don't know, but I do know about the warnings and how people are then forced to stay, or they don't want to stay, or there's other countries that won't open the borders. There's all kinds of things. So I am aware of other things as well. But I think the intention being, I do not believe that they want to intentionally kill civilians. Has it happened? Well, the news says all things. I just go with, I know that their intention is to get rid of Hamas. Do they know if that's possible or not and are willing to do that? I don't know.
That's
because war is war. Impossible. I don't know.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Harming civilians on either side is horrific, and it just seems impossible to get rid of the tunnels. I don't know how else they could do it.
I'm just going to say, whether one agrees or doesn't agree, let's keep this politically neutral on the removal of Hamas as it currently is. My concern is they are a group, but it's an ideology, and ideologies live on.
What do you think will happen to peace? Do you think this will be such a huge shift in whatever happens that there might be some new opportunities for peace when things settle down?
I think there's two things where people are coming together. That's incredible, and that's hope. On the other hand, when civilians get caught up in things, on a personal level, if somebody's lost family, they're struggling to survive, all kinds of things. My concern is that on both sides, people are hurt, upset, angry, struggling. There's a lot of emotions, and I don't think it's impossible now. It's always been hard. The situation's always been complex, but there's a lot of hurt and grief there, and that can carry on and on and on. But I still think there's hope. On the one hand, perhaps the recognition of my fellow civilians on the other side are suffering as well, and we're all human, and actually war was awful. On the other hand, people recognizing Hamas for what it is, and no longer excusing it because they may have been called such and such by somebody, but have you seen what they've done? I think there's learning opportunities all round, but at the same time, it's very sad because we're seeing the rise in anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim hate, and in terms of the anti-Semitism, it's almost like some people in their response, but I think it's just the embedded anti-Semitism that's always been there coming out. So I'm concerned in terms of the rising hate. I think peace activists are going to carry on. I think they're going to carry on their work. Maybe some people might feel, is this ever going to end actually? Is there any hope? But there are always pockets of hope, people working together, positive interactions. I think you've got to have hope. That's very easy for me to say when I'm sat in the UK. Very easy for me to say, isn't it? So I think important to elevate those voices of people who are kind of building bridges, not demonizing people for having very raw emotions, but also standing up against the anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hate when it does appear, because that isn't going to help, and that's not fair. Not there, and it's not fair here either, in terms of I think there's room for learning. There's been unfortunate learning, room for future progress and learning, room for hope, but a massive scar on world history. So
yeah. Do you know any people personally who've been hurt?
No, I know of people whose family have.
And what do you think about the other Arab nations and closing the border and not allowing folks in Egypt and Jordan?
Well, on the one hand, the Arab world is made up of diverse nations. They're not sort of one group in that sense.
Right. Right.
On the one hand, why should they?
No nation is, right?
Yeah, why should they be? Well, why should they sort of be lumped into as you're all Arabs? Because that kind of was like, no, Palestinians are Palestinians and they want their own independence. So there's that element. But on the other hand, be part of the help. I personally think that Egypt should have opened the border, and yes, the human thing to do.
But they say that certainly both in Jordan and Egypt, the Palestinians have remained refugees. What's up with that?
Talked about often the Arab world and how they leave people stateless and how they mistreat Palestinian refugees. I think as I said, I'm not an expert, but from the limited understanding I have, I also reckon there's some racism and prejudice there. But I think, kind of united stance is if we give them status, we've given up the fight, we've recognized Israel.
They cannot tell the difference necessarily between a Hamas member and a civilian, and that they say they're also worried about letting extremists into their country and then moving the violence to their country as they fight Israel from their country. I'm sorry?
Right, so that's what Egypt just said. Well, I think given the context of war and that civilians are dying, I think that's a pretty poor excuse. You could raise concerns like that, but that's the same in any context. Background checks, scaremongering, you know. I think that's a poor excuse. Yes, of course, do your background checks, of course, mate. But I mean, there are kids in Gaza. Open the border.
50%.
And I'm not saying that people say, oh, but no, I'm not putting the responsibility on one side. I'm just talking about this is the situation where it's right, you know, whatever that, and it's wrong that civilians are being affected. So open the border. You can do that. You can help in a way, help them.
Are you concerned that other Arab nations will get involved in the war?
All the politics isn't really my knowledge. I'm more concerned on the human angle and the effects. I think it's a tricky one because the Abraham Accords were such a positive move.
Mm-hmm.
And I do feel that a major step, again, not one-siding on here, a major step obstacle to peace is accepting Israel's existence. That's not, I can't say what the position of every Palestinian is, no. It's clearly Hamas's problem, but then on a horrible violent level. I think that my hope was that the Abraham Accords, not only in those kind of personal, you know, one-to-one relationships and facilitating travel and understanding, would also maybe outside of the direct context, kind of put a bit of pressure for, come on, can you have some more peace negotiations? Can you move forward with this? Sort of like a bit of a middleman. Now I don't know. I don't know because you've got the leader of Hamas in Qatar, which is highly problematic. Egypt won't open the border. I suppose it feels like it's being dumped on them. I don't feel like there's any sort of positive unity happening. If anything, they've kind of dumped them, to be honest. Apologies to anybody's listening to this. They could say, we're independent. You're either a unified kind of coalition or you're not. I mean, one that's not quite that simple, but they have very loud opinions. But actually, when it comes to helping people, what have they done? My concern is groups in Lebanon and Iran. My concern is Iran, yeah.
How has this impacted your work? This meaning the war? Yeah,
in terms of capacity, right now I've been focusing more on some of the Jewish Muslim things I do outside of Voice of Salam. Rather than the research project. It's still going to go ahead, but you know, the focus has been slightly shifted.
To what?
So I've been doing work with other organisations on, you know, the anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim hate piece about not, you know, letting it, which is still relevant to Voice of Salam, but I've been doing direct work with them. The research project will go ahead. If anything, it's taught me, as I said, anti-Semitism is such a massive problem, and we've just seen in how it's played out, not because of reactions and ignorance in terms of how it's addressed or emotions, stuff that should not be there, you know, the tropes, the conspiracies, all of that, that we need to carry on and do more against anti-Semitism. You know, also a reminder, seeing some of the comments, anti-Muslim and anti-Arab things, it's been disturbing.
Chaz?
There was one that I thought, I'm sorry, I have to say something. A gentleman blaming girls and children for the massacre.
What?
Yes, it doesn't even make sense. Doesn't even make sense. Wrong. You could ask, what are the views of Palestinians and Hamas? Again, every person's different. I'd have to do the research. And also, let's think about Palestinian suffering under Hamas. And also, there's going to be limited freedom of expression, incredibly limited, but none. So, but yeah, things like that. And, you know, a clip, there was an Israeli woman that was dressing up as what she would perceive as a Palestinian woman and mocking their suffering and grief of.
Oh, gross.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I think the sort of the lack of empathy for human beings on a human level.
Yeah. The anger has.
Yeah. But you know, you can be angry, but to mock somebody on it's like you're still human. You're still human. They're still human. That's a child. That's a mother. If anything, it's just reinforced the need for, as I said, the shared values, the shared humanity, remembering civilians are civilians, not pushing your nose into politics when actually that's incredibly complicated, and focusing, well, actually, what can we focus on? No to hate, whatever's going on somewhere else. That education on anti-Semitism, seeing examples of how, you know, the anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian hate is being manifested. More education for me, insight, more reason to carry on.
You being a Muslim woman, in the traditional Muslim faith, not always, but often, the women do not, it's really the men who have more of the political interaction. And I was wondering how does the de-emphasis of traditional women to take a stand in their community impact your work?
Well, that's an interesting issue because that could be cultural patriarchy. I think people like to separate culture and religion. A culture informs how religion's practiced. That, a more very conservative Muslim would, based on religious rationale, whether it's actually divided by God is something else, whether that's their culture coming in, would say, women are better off in the home. Basically, whatever the reasoning, there are some very powerful Muslim women across the world really pushing for spaces in governmental positions, but there is a deep-seated patriarchy. I think without generalizing, we can admit a certain sort of point.
The same in the Orthodox
yeah.
Jewish.
Yeah, and it depends on the community. I mean, I'm in Britain, so Britain's Britain. There can be some very conservative segments of the community, but as I said, I don't really try and do that on the ground. I don't rock up to a mosque and start talking about this. I'm mostly sort of online and in great grassroots interfaith spaces with other organisations where we're all like-minded and we're trying to work together. I mean, one of them is a women's organisation, so we're already on the same page there. Tricky. Something that I have noticed is it's tricky if I'm in, knowing the space, because then, but why are you saying all this and not this? Why are you saying these about these? The audience. If I know if I'm going to be in a space where it's going to be more anti-Israeli, I'm going to try and put some of the human stories there. Doesn't mean I don't care about Palestinians, but it's sort of the context. Or if there's specific sort of lies or tropes being promoted about something, then I'm going to address that. So the messaging can be difficult. As a woman, I think, as you said, we both have patriarchal elements of our communities. That's something that over the years I've just thought ain't going to stop me.
Yeah. Well,
being a liberal Muslim woman, because not so much that I'm a Muslim woman, it's because I don't have the conservative hat. I think that would be more a problem in my case in this country. Maybe in perhaps more wider Muslim in a Muslim country, maybe the gender thing might be more of a barrier. Yeah. I just try and think about the trickle-down effect, the people that know me on a personal level or indirectly on a personal level, but as a person who is Muslim, the trickle, that effect that we can all have on our friends, families, communities, not necessarily directly talking about it, but seeing what I post, having conversations, seeing about the relationships I make. I think there's different ways we can have an effect. And I don't want to sit and argue with fundamentalists and Islamists. They don't want to listen to me.
Right.
I'll call them out. I want to work on spaces where people might, that be like, oh, actually, that looked really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for that reminder. I think that, knowing the audience and when and where in the context.
You've personally had such an interesting background that's gotten to you this point. Can you briefly describe your journey?
Yeah, it has been an interesting background, and it's only through how it's developed more and more in that reflection that I've actually realised those kind of key elements were there from an early age. I just didn't really realise. So I grew up in, I'd say, semi-practicing Christian household. My mother was Italian. She obviously was a Catholic growing up, and then changed to the Anglican Protestant Church. My father is non-religious, but he is sort of culturally connected to Christianity in the sense that he's British, so Welsh-English mix, and there's Irish Catholic heritage there. So sort of the interfaith element was there, not something that I could word in that sense as a child, knowing that for example, my Italian cousins were Catholic and they did things a little bit differently, and that I was Anglican, but it wasn't a sort of a big difference to me. It was more in sort of, well, how do they do that? What does that mean? What are these differences? And then again, the Italian heritage, and there was a complex history there in terms of my mother's experience of racism growing up, moving to the UK in a post-war UK, a lot less tolerant than it is now, although not perfect now. And sort of her identity, why was my household not, in my words, in my feelings, this stereotypically Italian household? Why weren't we speaking Italian? And that followed me for many years with the sense of sort of injustice that I wasn't given the opportunity to learn that language. Not that I blame my mother. And through all of the years of my campaigning, meeting different people, activism, it's really shown me that they were the little seeds that kind of grew up to this point of learning about how people identify, why they do that, their experiences of trauma, racism, all different kinds of prejudice, how people self-identify in terms of, the female emancipation, the misogyny in, the sexism in her community, religious conservatism, how that affects women, and also the freedom to make your own religious choices. So I think all the elements were there. And then through my love of languages and culture, I started learning Arabic. I went to Tunisia to do some work at an intercultural language. It wasn't really a school. It was an opportunity for students of English to speak with native speakers, and to build those friendships. And it was one of the best experiences of my life, but only now do I realize how important it was, because this also merged at the same time of coming into my own, becoming an adult and reflecting on faith. I want to get back into church, but feeling disconnected and realizing that, well, I'm brought up with a particular faith and with the assumption that we are free to pick our own faith. Why don't I explore religions? I'd already been exploring Islam from a sort of ally perspective and Arab culture. Islam isn't an Arab religion, it's supposed to be universal, but there is a linkage there. I was traveling, meeting friends of different backgrounds, meeting Muslim friends, learning about it, and it all just kind of merged together on my own sort of spiritual path, and I converted to Islam. And that was quite, as you can imagine, a big change, but really in terms of identity, going from a majority religious background, you're coming into a religious minority. But I'm not an ethnic minority in Britain. Where do I fit in? Do I fit in either of those spaces? What's my role? And I read something that said, well, maybe converts, there may be, if they're between these sort of two worlds, even though, we should all be one, but there's different sort of sections, your role could be maybe more as the bridge builder. And that got me thinking. And at the same time, I moved to Spain. I was facing discrimination as a woman wearing a headscarf and seeing how that differed to people who were not visibly Muslim, but were ethnically North African compared to myself, who was visibly of the religion that I was being stigmatized for, but ethnically and culturally from a different background, seeing the different forms of hate, different histories. And it really enabled me to sort of bring my new kind of faith identity with my human rights background. And I started getting involved in interfaith work back in the UK. And it really went from there. I moved to London, where there's a much larger Jewish population than back home near Birmingham. Realised I didn't know much about this community, and that's really sad. Wanted to get involved. I wanted to trace potential family history in the Jewish world. We all share a commonality of being Abrahamic faiths. Theologically, we do believe in the Torah. And just socially, we need to know our neighbours, and I didn't. So I got involved in a Jewish Muslim women's group, and there's another theme there, women. I got involved in some fantastic initiatives such as Nissa Nashim, and it's really gone from there. I felt like all of the little kind of seeds along the way have led me to this point. Thinking about interfaith dialogue, intercultural dialogue. I did come from a mixed household, not an obviously stereotypically mixed household, but there were mixing of faith and non-faith traditions, culture traditions, national backgrounds, and then married into another cultural background. The friends I'd had, the experiences to travel to really kind of help me open my perspective to things, understand more nuance in the world. It's been a great experience on a personal level, and also in setting up Voice of Salam, joining other organizations, and being able to build those really key alliances, learn about other people. And it's been an amazing journey. And I think this is what I want to carry on for the rest of my life.
You can more easily, I think, understand why you work so hard on anti-Muslim hate. What's driving you about working so hard on anti-Semitism or Jewish hate?
I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but I think, and everybody's different. I think some people don't care about it. Some people don't understand it. Some people think it's exaggerated. Learning how you think you learn quite a lot about it, and then there's still more to learn. Learning about how deeply embedded it is in British European culture, the history of the church, the anti-Judaism, how that forms into mainstream culture, how anti-Israeli critique, how that becomes all these different strands. And when members of the Jewish community speak out about it, they're met with anti-Semitism. All the conspiracy theories and the libels and the myths and the tropes about being lies, about you can't win. You can't win. Also, because I was very anti-Israeli when I was younger, and I thought that wasn't anti-Semitism, and I see now how it was misinformed anti-Semitism. And I feel embarrassed for that. That's not why I started. I started about the curiosity of the interfaith because I believed that being Jewish and Zionist were two very, very, very distinct things. Now, you can be one without the other, but I was obviously following fringe groups. I didn't understand any of it. And so on a couple of levels, it's taught me about learning about people more than ever. I came to a point where I had to reflect on my understanding of things because having the personal relationships, I knew these were good people. So maybe I'd misunderstood. So on a broader level about those personal experiences, getting to know people, anti-Semitism being a rising problem, and the more we understand it and the more we stand out against it, the more we're helping to re-educate, hopefully shut it down. I don't know if it ever will disappear. And also just having those colleagues and friends and just the warmth and love that's been shown to me. Why wouldn't I? If I stand about against one form of hate but not another, I'm not really standing against hate, am I? Yeah, I think whilst each form of hate has a different history and maybe different examples of how it manifests, it's the human rights thing, isn't it? We're all humans, we all have rights, and we all have that dignity, and we should all help each other. And as everybody will back this up, because you know yourself, when one starts, another one starts. I think we should all agree that all forms of hate are wrong and that we should, come together.
You say that Jews and Muslims have so much in common. How so?
We really, really do. Religiously, when I go to a synagogue, I'm not just going, for example, as an act of solidarity. I personally really take a lot from the space. We believe it not only in a sort of coincidental, but we believe it is literally the same God. We are in the Islamic tradition. We believe that God brought the Torah. We see ourselves as part of that Abrahamic family. But unfortunately, it's often kind of become its own thing on its own. And I'm more of a kind of monotheistic approach. I take more of a monotheistic approach with things. I gain a lot from it. Culturally, like importance on, which is also linked to religion, obviously, importance on family values, food, coming together, lots of different things. So much in common. And then shared histories, not always positive, obviously. Geographic histories, North Africa, Amazigh history there, Jewish Berber Jews there long before the arrival of Islam. It's the Middle East and North Africa, Mediterranean region has always been a region that I've been fascinated in, and that includes a strong Jewish history. So a lot in common, definitely. And in the UK, both minority religions. It's another thing we have in common.
Before this war started, how would you describe the levels of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in Britain?
Not great. Anti-Semitism definitely on the rise. Anti-Muslim hate, I also believe, was on the rise. And again, with the advent of social media, you've got the merging of online and offline because they're not separate. It's one sort of reality in different ways of kind of discoursing with people, engaging, for better or for worse. I think social media is great, but again, it's another platform, and sometimes people do sort of hide behind it, knowing that, well, they're still the same people. Would you say that to them in the street? Bad. And obviously, some really great examples of people fighting against it. But in the context of this war, since the outbreak, it has both have risen.
Do you feel, as a Muslim woman in Great Britain, what does that feel like?
I do carry, not guilt, but I'm very conscious of the fact that because I don't wear a headscarf, not for this reason, I don't believe in it, and because of my ethnic background and people's assumptions of what being a Muslim is in this, anti-Muslim hate, the name says it's about being Muslim, but there's so much more to it. There's racism based on cultural background, there's lots of things there. And since not wearing a headscarf, nobody would visibly know by looking at me that I'm Muslim.
Right.
And even if I've been dressed in a North African dress, still haven't guessed because I heard some unsavory things. So I feel like I've got it easier than other people because the only way people can target me is if they know me. I mean, on social media, my religion's clear. So I don't really have the same experiences. Also, and again, people who don't just dislike the people for the faith, but the racism. My cultural background is of the majority community in this country. Minority, traditional sort of sense. We're all British. We're a very diverse country. When I was in Spain, that bridge between, the religious, the different, how, for example, at the time, my husband wasn't visibly Muslim, quite pale in skin tone. When they knew he was North African, I don't know if that was more of a anti-Muslim hate or an ethnic or both. Again, linked back to the Spanish history. With me, I felt that the problem for them was the religion and not my ethnicity, and that they sort of balanced in some sort of weird, strange way. So that is something as a Muslim woman I could face, but I obviously didn't face. I mean, and obviously, if somebody thought I was of a cultural background, they potentially would have given me racist abuse. But more confusion, I think, because of the different ideas of sort of religion and culture. They assume one comes with the other. Sometimes I feel like I'm sort of an unintentional spy. People will say things and I'm thinking, you have no idea I'm Muslim. So,
Yeah.
so maybe it's a bit of sort of learning of sort of how to engage or not engage. And perhaps, okay, I've seen there, been there, done that. They know who I am. I'm just not of any interest to them. Fine. Yeah.
Right.
But there is that. But I'm also able to just be me, and I will talk about Israel in a very normal way in conversations with people who happen to be Muslim. And engaging with Muslims perhaps outside of the specifically Muslim space, but just as people, it's been interesting to see how people react to sort of, oh, I'd like to travel to Israel and see how they react when we're not in a religious space per se, but person to person. It's interesting learning experience.
Okay, well, I want to get into some of your fantastic work. I know you blog and advocate in social media regarding your Jewish Muslim activism. Can you tell us about your projects?
Yeah, so a current project that I'm working on is a research project. It was kind of inspired by my own sort of experience, as I said, of being anti-Israeli and seeing actually how that fed into anti-Semitism, and sort of having quite dramatically changed my beliefs. So based on that, this is a project that's been in the pipeline for a while, and I've since reached out to Jewish organizations and going to be getting some more kind of networking to get the accounts. It's not focused solely on Muslim anti-Semitism, aiming for quite a range of accounts from, say, far left to far right, to show that the different forms of anti-Semitism, or how it manifests and where. So a research project where I really like to speak to people who had anti-Semitic views, either interviewing or sharing their accounts that already exist, people who held anti-Semitic views, either knowingly or unknowingly, and have come to change their beliefs. So looking at what were the environments that they were in, what were sort of the weaknesses there, what was the pull factor on it, how that process, what was the process of change. For example, for me, it was engaging in interfaith spaces, which I thought was unrelated to Zionism in the sense of separating the two. And that was the platform and space where I was able to talk to people to learn about Israel, Zionism, etc. So for me, it was the personal relationships and interfaith activism. So I really wanted to sort of dig into those experiences. It could be anonymously. Obviously, some people may reluctant to share their stories, and learn how can we combat that? How can we prevent and overcome it for learnings for the future in terms of how, into education advocacy, who do we target? What's sort of messaging, understanding sort of what the vulnerabilities were, or perhaps being surrounded by the wrong type of information, or what their kind of pull factors were. Was it purely inspired by sort of far right hate, for example? So sort of understanding those backgrounds, and on a lighter note, also not just in terms of learning, but kind of sharing how people have sort of changed their views, and there is sort of there's hope for positive change. So that's a project that I'm currently working on. In the background, ongoing blogs and sort of social media work.
Another project that you have is for LGBTQI rights.
I was really fortunate to recently interview Toma El-Dubi, a Israeli playwright, on his play about LGBT Palestinians who were seeking asylum in Israel. So obviously before the recent outbreak of war. Had a great interview with him.
What is that all about? I'm
so
not
his
familiar
play
with that.
His play Sharif is about, based on his sort of research and work, so real examples. Mm-hmm. He wrote this play, and it's about Sharif, a queer Palestinian Muslim in the West Bank who seeks refuge in Israel. And there are people that go through that process. I think it's first of all highlighting how arts, as a poet myself, how arts are important for that kind of social activism, raising awareness within Israeli society about Palestinians that are moving over. Also, with a lot of, the accusations of pink washing. Actually, let's talk about something that's happening. This is positive for these people.
Could you define pink washing?
So Wikipedia, for example, it refers to pink washing, also known as rainbow washing, is the strategy promoting LGBT rights protections as evidence of liberalism and democracy, especially to distract from or legitimize violence against other communities or countries. So it's bringing it back to the conflict again. So the idea that Israel is this horrible, and that anything positive about LGBT rights, it's being used to sort of counteract an otherwise negative image, as in they don't actually care about LGBT rights. So I had that's our latest blog, published a really interesting interview with Toma about Hit the Play, what inspired the play, the reality behind the play, how people can find out more about the play.
According to the traditional Quran and Islamic law, same-sex marriage is prohibited. Do you agree with that? And what makes you want to go against that teaching if you do?
Well, that is a dominant position. History is more varied than that. I do not believe that theologically that there is any problem with being gay and being Muslim, or being trans and being Muslim. I don't believe it's about tolerating. I believe it's actually about accepting.
Have you incurred backlash for your stance?
Yes.
What type?
A weird mix of kind of biphobia, misogyny, well, it's linked, and anti-Semitism. So if I would reject the idea, polyamory, I think is fine. If that's something that works for some people, something that doesn't. I have a problem with polygamy being one-sided. Obviously, historical context, different kind of things about, numbers of men who are in war, women, but who's the father, etc. But in this modern day context, polyamory, fine. Everyone should be free to do their things, but it should work both ways. And if some people want to be a second wife, that's fine, but I don't want to do it. Rejecting that, then suddenly the biphobia, being bisexual is a problem. I mean, in a way that the misogyny is, why is it less of a problem for me to be bisexual than a man to be gay? That is, I think, inherently misogyny, because we're less of a problem, or it's taken less seriously. But then it would come, you're likening us to sort of the kind of people that, like, as though we're just kind of immorally bankrupt. People have sex with animals, are morally bankrupt. And then came the anti-Semitism and things like that, just spewing out all different kinds of hate. And that actually inspired a blog looking at misogyny, anti-Semitism, and the experiences of Jewish women, which is published in Muslims Against Anti-Semitism, and that's on the Voice of Salam website. Kind of explains the thought process of how that blog started. On Twitter, through GIFs, basically, the GIF implying that I should jump or be pushed off a building. That is what ISIS would want, that you push. That's the beliefs of hardcore Islamists, that you push gay people off roofs.
So
everybody in my life's cool. Everybody's in my sort of circle is cool, but then I don't hang around with bigots. So.
Okay, so you got in this end of your project out of a personal belief system, and that you wanted to fight the anti-LGBTI community.
Well, it's more the human rights background, and then looking at there's also a problem with homophobia in the Muslim community that's different. There's problems everywhere with homophobia, but the human rights background about LGBT rights, but also as a Muslim woman, I know that there's a lot of mainstream views that are anti-LGBT, different attitudes to how to approach it, obviously. My view, though, is actually believing that it's wrong, it's homophobic, and I'm not going to sort of soften that for people.
Your emphasis on refugee rights.
I think that really, again, human rights based, and also, the cultural linguistic sort of curiosity of the world. We're all human. Refugees, another form of hate, xenophobia, anti-refugee rhetoric, which overlaps with, anti-Muslim hate and all kinds of different things. Refugees have a really hard time. Nobody wants to have to flee their country and then to face abuse in your new home. All those negative stereotypes, all of the lies, the myths, the scapegoating. They're humans, they're people.
Do you know a lot of refugees? Have you worked with them?
My first job out of uni was in a refugee, migrant, and asylum seeking charity. I went over to Calais twice and helped out there and also co-led a convoy. On a personal level, I've met quite a few people, but in different contexts. So not newly arrived, for example,
Right.
people that maybe came over when they were younger. So on a sort of daily basis, I have actually. I haven't done a lot of frontline work with refugees and asylum seekers, though, no. But it's always been a passion of mine, always an area of interest. And I also did a trip to Athens interviewing Turkish asylum seekers and their experiences. That's a project that capacity again that I want to get out there sharing their experiences, because there are a couple of things came out of that, horrible experiences, why they had to flee, and also the experience of the difficulties of living in Turkey trying to get status, sorry, not Turkey, Greece, sorry, the difficulties of getting status in Greece and also sharing the burden.
How are they treated in Greece?
Well, time flies. The trip was a couple of years now pre-COVID, very, very long waiting times. It was just like you left in limbo. I mean, for security reasons, obviously, there's privacy concerns, but just in terms of trying to get status, lack of opportunities, lack of job opportunities, what kind of future would they have? Talking about these issues. I faced some horrible abuse from Greek accounts, anti-Muslim, misogynistic, xenophobic abuse. Obviously, that's specific individuals.
Are they also kept in camps there?
Not sure about that one. These were families that had crossed a river and had to flee. Some of the husbands were imprisoned back home. Some had been able to come with their wives and kids, and were struggling just to start a new safe life. So yeah, that's something I also want to focus on, raise awareness of that. The issue of sharing the burden. I mean, we're not in the EU now, Brexit. That's another issue. Everyone talks about, well, can't they take them? Well, also, there's so many misconceptions there. Most refugees live in developing countries, for a start. How many does the refugees and asylum seekers does the UK actually take? Very little. Looking at the facts. So, information campaigns, going to want to share those stories. It's an area of interest that, this is the human element again, the right to be safe. And again, the hate piece again, hating on refugees, all this scapegoating, all these myths and incorrect information. Yeah.
Right.
And the bridge building of the cultural bridge building, when you arrive, it's very difficult. Sure. Welcoming people, learning from each other, cultural exchange. There's so many different elements there.
Language.
Can do with. Yeah. I used to teach English. So to see how all these little parts of my life come together. And, another member of Voice of Salam, Roni, she's American Jewish. She's now in Mexico. She moved there. She was a language teacher for years. And I can see she talked about it in her writing. And there's a blog coming up about it, actually. How that depth of experience of teaching English to people of different backgrounds, so many different backgrounds, how it enriched her life and how she learned so much about what the experience is like for people, obviously secondhand, what it's like, the difficulties, having that insight, that life experience, compared to somebody that maybe reads a newspaper and thinks, oh, they're taking my job, and actually has never met a refugee and doesn't think about the immense struggles they face. The dehumanization of people again. So it's also all really important in sort of raising awareness, educating, sharing refugee stories as well.
And your work in interfaith and different couples?
Oh, that's been a really, really fun project. A difficult one because there's different factors there. So I was really, really blessed to be doing a fellowship last year in cultural and interreligious dialogue. And this is an area of interest that I've been working on. I wanted to put a piece out about it. Again, because there really are examples of accepting one another. If you're happy to marry into another culture, you're embracing it, or you should be at least. And there's give and take as well. And again, reflecting on the fact of like my own marriage, my parents' marriage, that not obviously interfaith or intercultural, but again, mixed backgrounds in terms of faith and culture and ethnicity. And we had to do a project for this program. So I thought, first thing that came to mind was, yes, the couples thing. Obviously focusing more around the role of dialogue. And it was so much fun, but it's very difficult to get people to participate. Again, because there's some real taboos, privacy concerns around jobs, families facing abuse, just perhaps they don't want to share their private lives. Made it a video campaign because I really wanted to see the dynamic of people interacting, what the couple looks like, how they are. It's more engaging for, digital platforms. But again, you're losing the anonymity, excuse me, there. So you're getting the insight, but you're asking people to talk about their relationships, and it's going to go all over the internet. But I did manage to pass the project for the fellowship and graduate, and that project is carrying on. quite a lot of Jewish participants, actually. It was very interesting. And again, the diversity, wanted to make sure there's some queer couples in there. It's got to be inclusive. I had a Jewish, British couple, Jewish and Anglican. Jewish American Polish background with, I would say, sort of a culturally Catholic Polish background, queer couple, Vietnamese Buddhist and say like British agnostic. Had somebody who was a Baha'i convert with his atheist English partner. And it was interesting to see, one of the couple said, well, actually, some of the differences were not so much about the faith, but, I'm Scottish, she's English.
Right.
Those kind of things. And I think that's something that I found in life, other experiences, people saying it wasn't actually the religious difference, it was more the cultural difference that I kind of struggled with. So it's been really interesting. And one of them was so lovely. They actually said, this project has actually really helped us reflect on things that maybe they didn't word it in those terms, but reflect on, how they do communicate and work past these things, or, what is perhaps more difficult or isn't, and actually the importance of dialogue. So it's been really fun and a really nice personal project, interviewing the couples, meeting them, get to know them. And it's something that I want to definitely carry on with. More experiences, more diversity. It's something that I would actually like to do for a PhD. I think it's such an untapped area. And you could go in all kinds of directions, looking more specifically at the dialogue. What does that language look like? More the linguistic angle, or keeping more on the kind of, social angle, that those dynamics of how do they have that dialogue. Also, there's a lot of kind of nuance there. Everybody lives their religious and cultural backgrounds differently. Some maybe ultra religious. Being Jewish for somebody may mean something different for somebody else. Some may have been brought up in a
Absolutely. And marriage is hard enough. Even if you're from the same background.
Exactly. Gender. There's so many things that you could learn, I think, take away about the role of dialogue as a whole and relationships as a whole. I kept it to relationships, not marriage, to keep it, open. But I think most of the couples are actually married. Not all of there was a mix, but relationships. And it was quite difficult because in terms of finding the research data, some related to married, some related to non-married, some related to more the cultural, ethnic mixing rather than the religion. And then again, what does religious? Some people may be very culturally of a faith, different practices, different elements of practice. And I think there's a lot of kind of key things that you can take from that about dialogue as a communication tool, how people are religious and culturally diverse within their own communities, so many different things. And it was really, really fun. Still looking for more participants. If anybody's interested, drop me an email.
I had to laugh that you made me think with all of the conflict resolution studies and so on within the peace organizations, how in anyone's marriage that probably would be helpful. I think they should.
Well, it's human, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about navigating difference, but it could be in one couple. The difference is more, that might be a sort of gendered stereotypical man thing that you're taught to be. I mean, also like the nature nurture thing again, we're all so different. I mean, it made me fret. Well, technically I was brought up in a mixed faith and cultural background, but not in the same ways in that couple, for example. A very British, seemingly British, but the Italian culture there, culturally Christian. So it's very different. But then there are differences there in terms of, I do feel like Catholicism is a sort of cousin faith rather than something I know nothing about. Well, for some people, that may be very different to their experience as Christian. So,
just like Jewish. I mean, there's so many different denominations and so on. And then within each, different views as well. Just people are different.
It's really important to not stereotype people. Yeah, and again, remembering the humanity, which in light of this conflict really is the theme. People are people. Any decent people shouldn't want another person to suffer, and civilians are civilians, and remember the humanity. And I think that's the really key theme with all of this kind of work.
Well, I think that's a great way to end. I want to thank you, Liz, so much for explaining to us as a Muslim woman how you feel about all these different subjects. I want to reiterate, killing of all types to me is anathema, but I do understand where Israel is coming from, given the horrific slaughter of their citizens. I hope that Israel will continue to do everything they can to avoid harming any Gazan civilians, but I also realize that may not be possible as Hamas forces them to stay and uses them as human shields. Even Jordan, Egypt has closed its borders, with one of the stated reasons being they don't want an influx of extremists into their country that will disturb their peace that they've had with Israel nor do they want another flood of refugees. But again, where's the humanity? I also want to say that what's happening throughout the world, the US and in our communities, with extreme anti-Semitism and anti-Israel discourse is dangerous. Islamophobia also needs to stop. Hate is a disease and it's spreading virally. When Jews on college campuses aren't safe, it's unconscionable. When the campus administrations remain complicit and silent, I hope we will soon hear from more friends that they too support the right of Jews to live safely in the United States. The world is a mess now. Sometimes terrible circumstances provide new opportunities. Let's hope that will be the result. May you live in peace, shalom, and salam.